Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome to The Right Opinion, the home of a twat with too much free time. And when people ask me what inspired me to start YouTube, if I was to list off channels that served as motivation for my YouTube career, Channel Awesome and most notably Doug Walker, aka the Nostalgia Critic, was one of them. Every Tuesday night I'd grab a takeaway and pull up my laptop and watch his latest review in almost a ritualistic manner, and that habit has continued up until this day. Even though I'm not unconditionally in love with his content, it's hard to deny they've brought me gems like Sharkboy and Lavagirl that had me chuckling for days following, and I don't laugh at much these days, so for someone as emotionally soulless as me, to have that sort of content to at least entertain the vacuum was meaningful. And I've learned a lot about cinema through the indirect messages often portrayed in their episodes. It's often clever commentary. I found out about the Nostalgia Critic through that guy with the glasses. I cannot exactly say how that happened. We're talking about approximately 2011 when I discovered their content, so bringing specifics into my memory is a challenge to say the least. Though I will say that I also discovered two other critics, Todd in the Shadows and the Rap Critic, in quick succession, although I'm not sure in which order. But much alike to the NC, they are two critics whom I still watch to this day. I'm not going to enter too much depth as I assume it's a story that you already know by now, but that guy with the glasses was set up by a partnership between Doug Walker and a few other people that we'll get to in a moment. This was done in light of the very stringent copyright rules regarding YouTube and a situation with regards to his 5-second movies, and it's covered in a nice little article that I will link below. I know the fair use debate or not is quite contentious, and it's fairly subjective. It's the sort of comedic cutting that came into contention early this year with Sargon of Akkad and Aquila, obviously. But either way, hosting videos on Blip and using their domain as a way to embed their content, they decided it would be reasonable to host a numerous selection of creators as well. But wait a minute, I hear you say, who are they? Well, let's talk about the main characters. We've got Doug Walker, who we've already introduced, his brother Rob Walker, and a third individual named Mike Mashord. The two other individuals were Mike Ellish and Bhargav Dromanraju, the latter of which there isn't too much to say, and the former of whom we'll address later. Now if you're thinking to yourself, I've never heard of Mashord. Don't worry, I hadn't heard of him either until a couple weeks before the memo, when I coincidentally found myself on their Wikipedia page, briefly before the document in question was released. I remember thinking to myself, I've never heard of this bloke. What does he do? Well, things. He does things. Things that we'll address very soon. I was having a discussion with Quinton Reviews over this before the documents were released. We had both noted how many creators had left abruptly and seemingly with little notice. We'd wondered about the explanations for such decisions. Well, on April the 2nd, after rumbles of activity, we received their full side of the story. The document itself is an approximately 70-page condemnation of Channel Awesome and their questionable behaviour and incidents that resulted due to it. Now, I'm someone who always looks into such claims with an element of skepticism. It's an integral part of my philosophy, because if I didn't, then I think that such an approach could easily be exploited by people with malintent, although I do completely comprehend that it's a tender subject. Even with that said, the sheer number of corroborating testimonies and accounts makes it hard to dispute, to say the least. Saying any of it is purposely falsified at all is a push. They persuaded me over the benefit of the outline for Channel Awesome. I've read all 70 pages and it definitely seems like there's a strong element of truth to it. The document had a few purposes from an outsider's perspective. The first was to challenge the images of certain public representatives, most notably Doug and Rob Walker. Doug is presented as a naive visionary who was blinded by his own apparitions and was often complicit in too many things, while Rob is portrayed as a socially unaware, disinterested and occasionally callous figure. Now obviously these moments are spotlighting the worst incidents that have occurred. However, this does not denigrate their existence. Nonetheless, it's clear that there are still people who have had positive experiences with the Walkers, and I'll try and investigate this divide in a bit. However, we have a bit more explanation to cut through before we start to dissect this very sorry situation. Yes, the real story comes when discussing the company's CEO Mike Mashord. Now, if there's someone who came out with less than a flattering image, it would be the elusive majority stakeholder in the business. The document has multiple individuals who testify that his behaviour was less than adequate, and once again, I'm not going to go into specifics as that's already done in the document, but allegations include bullying, coercion, throwing fits, ignoring a scandal, failing to act on concern, favoritism, and shafting creators he did not like. And that's really just the tip of the iceberg. He doesn't come across as a pleasant fellow, to say the least, and although evidence is not provided to substantiate every claim, there is definitely enough, including an actual audio clip, albeit a short one, which shows him actively exiling a creator from returning to the site, while also having signaled no intent to inform him. There are a fair few DMs of him behaving rather coldly, and some just of him not responding at all to necessary messages. Although none of his supposed eruptions are recorded, I do not doubt the legitimacy of the claims. Either way, his name is not shrouded in glory throughout what is written, and on top of that, it appears that he has Channel Awesome in a stranglehold where he has partial license over the Nostalgia Critic, Doug Walker's lifeline. Now, if this information is true, which I have no reason to believe it otherwise, it places Doug in a very awkward ultimatum, where the main source of his income is partly in the hands of someone who can practically do anything he wants. And given the illustration of this character, he isn't the sort of person you'd want to entrust such a responsibility with. This theory intertwines fairly well with the memo, with situations where it appears that Doug was trying to act as a person to mediate but still side with the business becoming synonymous with the CEO in question. But keeping all this information in mind, we have to ask ourselves what can be learned from this situation. What can we learn from Channel Awesome? Now, in a way, what is written in the memo is fairly unexceptional to me. I've worked 5 jobs in my life, 2 of them tried to swindle money out of me when I left, and another had an adverse and unpredictable boss who was not good to work around. A lot of the stories told in the Not So Awesome memo focus on that sort of environment, one that many of you watching this video have probably experienced within employment. So although there is more, why is it necessary that they document topics that appear to be part of what you deal with when getting into a job? Well, it's mainly to challenge the public perception above all. Channel Awesome, or that guy with the glasses, was always presented as this community, this group of people who were getting along and having fun, all mates. Doug, the benign overlord, and the management who had you in their interest. Many people wanted to join. I mean, even when I present it like that, you think it's far-fetched, but that's the default thing we have when we think of the platforms challenging the YouTube mentality. But at the end of the day, it seems that Channel Awesome was just another shell. That's not particularly special, but we have this subconscious expectation of what CA should be, and here is the alternate take. This doesn't shock me at all. It's not something that is alien to me, in fact. It's just a shame that if it's true, a few bad apples, maybe even just the one, spoiled the whole bunch and ruined what could have been a genuinely surreal experience. As a CEO, you often have to make tough decisions, with an element of ruthlessness to them. CEOs have the highest representative proportion of psychopaths and sociopaths in those occupations, in part for that reason. Now, I'm not saying that Mishandling in this instance is a psychopath, but the revelation of a CEO being particularly merciless is not a surprise to me either. And once again, I emphasize that not all the claims are completely substantiated, so I don't take them as a certainty. However, circumstantially, what is written is very plausible given business and staff practice in general. The fact that there are people who we might think we know through their content is irrelevant. However, whereas many businesses there is a stake in the employees, there was very little worth in that guy with the glasses. You see, they didn't take a stake in the income made by the individual producers, and although this on principle may sound good to them, it means that they were just promotional instruments, and therefore if their promotional value was diminished, the management had free reign to strike them off as they pleased. I think these loose working relationships were always destined to fail, especially if one fell out of favour with someone like Mishandling. There was no binding contract, there was no legality. Unless you were actually employed, there was not really much you could do in the way of injustices. You're always walking a tightrope. I think that's where the apparent contradiction came in. There were clearly people who wanted to make Channel Awesome into this community, the films, the collabs, but when it came down to it, there were others who weren't part of that who could also pull the plug as they wished. And having a rift in the vision of management would rarely be conducive to creator well-being, especially when no resolve is clear. I don't like a lot of businesses. That's why being self-employed isn't ideal for me. The moment you relinquish control of what you truly want to do is the moment it becomes a lot harder to realize your creative visions. And that's the thing, Channel Awesome didn't necessarily feel like a business. It's not an employer to many of these people, and in that way that should have put them at ease, but in fact it led to their positions becoming more insecure. And when someone like Mishandling is around, you will always feel slightly fragile. Many of the things written about in the document are common occurrences in standard businesses. On YouTube even, I've seen my friends have their channels unjustifiably terminated, and although they were restored, it was not a pleasant experience for them. Channel Awesome was meant to be better than that. They presented themselves as better than that. I think that's the ultimate disappointment, that at the end of the day, it seems they were no different. And in almost a way to affirm this, they put out an awful tweet where they say that they regret that the producers feel this way. Now, if you watch my YouTube response to fellow humans, you'll know that I have no time for vague responses, and it doesn't become much vaguer than what was on show here. It is simple advice. If you feel that a response is insufficient, then maybe best to hold it off, because it's just self-incriminating if you use phrases like, "We regret that you feel that way." What's that even meant to imply? It's a pathetic response, and listen, I understand that when such a blitz of criticisms ambushes you, it's hard to know exactly how to respond. It's never easy, but there are ways not to respond, and congratulations CA, you have perfectly executed how not to respond. And then came their second response, and this one was meant to answer the allegations directly. Once again, it was insufficient and subjective. My favourite part was how they responded to former staff member Holly Brown by just saying that her allegations are not true, but not explaining why they weren't true or presenting an alternative version of events, which would be necessary. The accusation being listed as Holly Brown makes numerous accusations is not even remotely logical. Do you even PR? It also stated that they could, quote, obviously not respond to these 73 pages of allegation. Yes, you could. If it would help your case, you should. They claim they are going to answer the most egregious ones, but don't even mention the allegation that Mishaud bullied a producer into a suicidal mindset. That one seemed pretty inflammatory if you ask me. I know there may be some other responses by the time this video is out, however my prediction is that they will not satisfy people, as the only way to truly respond would be to present alternate perspectives in each experience, and no one seems willing to do that. And although I don't like writing extra points last minute, I was just rerunning over their second response, and it's even worse than I thought. For example, their first point is how they claim the screenshots they provided show they dealt with the issue within 3 weeks, when all it shows is that there were 3 weeks in between 2 conversations around the issue, and anyone could have been aware of it before then. How they think this is definitive counter evidence is beyond me, and people will see through it, and people have seen through it. It couldn't be more corporate if it tried, and that's the issue, and that's why this document is often focused on image. Doug Walker is not Channel Awesome, he is Channel Awesome's PR, he is Channel Awesome's presenter, and what really goes on behind the scenes is not done in the community spirit. To that, you might argue, they have no obligation to, and you are completely right, they are not obliged to behave in their producer's best interests. But in a way, that's accepted as premise in this. What the document was more about was people falsely believing that it is a creator-focused platform. Now, of course, there were some more exceptional situations, such as the sexual harassment issues with former executive Mike Ellis. But the document doesn't necessarily focus on him, more on Mishaud's reaction to Ellis's behavior, which appears to be passive to say the least. As Ellis is not an incumbent member of management, to focus a document on a departed member would clearly undermine the intended relevance. Even if it's based off old events, there are still people currently in the loop. Channel Awesome is a business. Many of the allegations do not surprise me. We will talk about the more serious ones soon. However, the reason why this document surprised a lot of people, despite the mostly unremarkable claims, is because it contradicts the image. And image is everything to a lot of these people. So for such damning claims to come against the quote, good guys, is more shocking than if someone complained about YouTube employees being mean to them. Because Channel Awesome were meant to be better. And they wanted to be better. And they presented themselves as better. In her testimony, former administrator Holly Brown wrote that the Walkers didn't know Mishaud and his associates until they approached him. Now, the way Brown presents it makes it look like Mishaud just turned up on Walker's doorstep. Now, I cannot say it was to that degree, however, it did seem to be a fairly spontaneous business venture. And if true, this is bad business practice. And we're going to use my Discord as an example. I've ran a few servers in my time, and if there's 2 things I've learned, it's firstly, never give someone an administrator role just because they're your friends. And secondly, never give someone an administrator role just because they ask for it. Why is that? Well, the latter in this example is particularly important because if someone is interested in working for me and they just straight up ask, it is not grounds to sign away, no matter how intent they may seem at the time, even if they have a plethora of reasons for why you should. The issue is that someone consciously trying to attain a role often means they don't present themselves as who they are, especially if such effort is exerted over a short amount of time. The way Brown presents it implies that Mishaud and his mates pretty much turned up and got the job. I can't say whether it's true or not, but that is how it is presented. Now, when he turned up, he may have looked the part, and I understand that. In the moment, he might have seemed like the perfect candidate for the position, but human beings just do not work like that. You really have to see firstly how they perform when they think someone isn't looking, and also how they perform over a longer stretch of time. How much they're willing to put in for that next step. You have to measure that genuine commitment rather than what may be masqueraded. When I made my Discord server, I approached a majority of admins from previous servers and offered them the role, because I knew them from their own performances and I knew that they weren't expecting that. Now, that's not possible for every occupation, and obviously someone would always have to anticipate taking the role of CEO, but you can't just sign it away to the first person who comes to you. That's playing with fire, and in this instance, it seems multiple people got burned. And although I will not be integrating an excessive number of personal observations, I must say that the original That Guy with the Glasses website layout became outdated very quickly, and the team appeared to lack any distinguishing expertise that might give them an appeal that may compensate for them behaving less than respectfully. What I'm saying is that even if they were a dodgy lot, they may have a unique skill set, some redeeming quality that gave them grounds for hire. However, that was just not on display when you went on the site, and judging by the numerous technical criticisms, it was not on display in other areas as well. Unfortunately, there are a fair few sly dogs who can impress in a short time period, but quickly turn into the sort of character that Mishaud is portrayed as. However, whereas in my Discord I can quickly strike off who I decide unfit to handle such power by having them term as the majority shareholder and shared owner of the Nostalgia Critic IP, it frankly gave him an unhealthy amount of control. It's an inconceivable level of mishandling of responsibility, even if Miss Short is not the person he has made out to be in the document. The other concern is when you begin to involve numerous family or friends, which was quite common in Channel Awesome. Nepotism can become rife, as although it may not genuinely reflect who they are as people in general, having an affirmed bias towards people you might have an emotional connection with is very common. This does not necessarily guarantee bad management, but many often can make the false assumption that because there's a level of intimacy, that person may feel more obliged to you. This is true sometimes, but it's dependent on the presence of yourself. As demonstrated in the memo, it's conveyed the people assigned to the roles didn't want the job and were often absent from this post. This is not good, and here's why. In the absence of supervision, someone who is a friend or family member can firstly levy the trust of their word, and supervisors who do not want the job do not want the conflicts associated with it either, and will likely side with their friend or family member within disagreements, as disputes in the workplace would extend a lot further on a personal basis. Combine with this the fact that the people in this situation already have considerable control in the workplace, it is a recipe for disaster. This is only inflamed by the fact that the producers were not bound by contract, so in disputes you could just pull them from the sites. In a way, I'm almost amazed more abuse didn't occur at the time. The culture created through the pretense of that guy with the glasses and the mentality adopted by the Walker brothers cultivated an ideal scenario for easy exploitation. It's almost stupendous. Regardless of what you think of the validity of the document at hand, there is something fundamentally worrying about the thought of handing over the IP and shares of an asset vital to your survival. That seems crazy to me. On the surface, it seems like disorganized, distant management unfamiliar with the awful decisions they were making, with some truly rotten eggs. However, with that all said, everything irrational, everything immoral has something that underlines it, a decision that may make sense at the time. And although we could say that Miss Short is an unpleasant person with some degree of conviction, there's probably a lot more going on behind the scenes with regards to other characters in this story. If there's one thing I've learned is that even good people in bad environments can make dreadful decisions. Nonetheless, throughout the document, many of its authors retrospectively illustrate themselves as starry-eyed, naive individuals willing to take some jabs for their idols. And all it takes in those situations is one slightly negative actor to take advantage of that. What message can be imparted from that onto the audience of this document? Now, before anyone reacts and criticizes me for such a general statement, I am aware it is a hyperbole. I am not saying that you should lock yourself up and never be afraid to interact with people you look up to. Not at all. There are many environments in which this is perfectly reasonable. However, situations with Channel Awesome are a whole different ballpark. Why is that? Well, you're not just meeting someone, but you're working with someone, under the premise of what can be construed as a business venture. Firstly, you are almost certain to go beyond their public facade. That's not an inherently bad thing on principle. Sometimes it's good to see how someone really operates. However, businesses are by nature rooted in conflict, and situations like that of Channel Awesome are not uncommon. Nonetheless, what makes it unique is how many admired those like Doug Walker. Let me give you an example. Do Walmart employees join with an idolization of Greg Penner or Doug McMillan? Let's just say it's unlikely. They probably join with a fonder view of internet sensations such as the Yodeling Kid. But the Yodeling Kid isn't in cahoots with human resources. That's the thing, you're partially in the vicinity of a public figure, and in fact, comparably, it could be considered quite intimate to the point where even if you had a very minimal role, you still felt like you were in some form of contact with figureheads like Doug Walker. But I'd argue that's not a good thing. Businesses naturally require hard decisions, and having your career damaged by someone who you admire can really be soul-destroying. A lot of these producers came in with the expectation of what Channel Awesome would be. This unique community, as I said earlier. Channel Awesome was meant to be different. I know plenty of people who wanted to go and work there for the image that it had created. However, because of this public image, when many of the producers were subjected to what could be seen as maltreatment, they may have questioned it, may have placed blame on themselves, and maybe asked whether their perspective was just an outcome of their actions. The producers also felt fragile in their own positions because Channel Awesome had complete prerogative to remove creators from the site whenever they wished, and producers could not try and challenge it because there was no binding contract. Channel Awesome isn't necessarily an employer, but in effect, that made the situation worse. It appears that Mishandling came along with his own agenda and exploited producers and their admiration of Doug Walker to the maximum degree. And with the Nostalgia Critic IP partially under his belt and the producers under his thumb, it led to the alleged subsequent bullying of creators, atop of a lengthy silence even after many producers departed. However, to take down Mishandling, many of these producers would also have to lightly confront their conflicting feelings about Walker and Channel Awesome. The fact that his content still brings joy to many people's lives, the respect for the content that he puts out, the question of how common these situations were, whether their situations were individual experiences, whether it's worth the risk considering the overlap in their fan base. A lot of this yields from the fact that people wanted to look at an environment like Channel Awesome in a positive light, and only after years of deliberation and consultation could they create a remotely convincing image otherwise, one that people have undoubtedly disputed regardless. And that is fine, that is healthy. I'm not guaranteeing that everything in this document is 100% accurate. If you want to question the validity in search for the truth, then more power to you. But either way, there is a lot at stake for creators in this, leaving and subsequently condemning a platform that, in spite of the allegations, has contributed a lot to their career. That is undeniable, but that can't alone undermine the written expectations of these people. When people say never meet your heroes, that statement alone is reductionist. However, there's a reason why such an idiom exists. When we watch these people from afar, they may seem great, they may seem like the ideal people to have working relationships with. It's just not the case, and you have to approach it with the same caution that you'd approach any prospective opportunity with. When that opportunity presents itself, you should really question whether you want to put your own career in their hands. I've had the pleasure of working with people I've admired for a long time, but I've also been greatly disappointed by certain people. This disappointment is something that can magnify and manifest into many different emotions when you have the conditions that Channel Awesome presents. It doesn't mean they're bad people, but even if they're good people, they may make mistakes, they may involve bad people, and you might be at the receiving end of that. That could really taint your dreams. If you do find yourself in these situations, you have to put your innate bias towards these people aside. You have to look at the situation independently and separate your own expectations. Situational context matters. I cannot stress that enough. How good or bad characters like Doug or Rob Walker are is down for you to decide. But either way, if the situation is as it appears, they have made some awful mistakes, whether it's not understanding the environments for making a film, handing over their vision to someone with less than amiable intentions, or the numerous decisions that followed. Whether they are comfortable in that position, whether they were comfortable in that position, is regardless, they stayed in it, and that is the real shame. These decisions appear to come from a lack of guidance, a false sense of security, and supposed exploitation of the worst denominator, and a mechanism to perhaps try and justify these people's decisions in their heads. Mishandled appears to be the villain of this tale. Nonetheless, I would be intrigued to hear if the Walkers have anything to say about these allegations. Although they may not wish to respond, I feel that there are people still open to hearing them out, as they are not portrayed as irredeemable in the documents. To respond under the Channel Awesome banner with the pseudo-apology would be a grave mistake. But to be honest, I don't know what's going on behind the scenes. Either way, it concerns me. The idea that someone like Mishandled, if he's as unpredictable as the document presents him, having that control over a domain and partial hold on a character that's a primary source of income, makes my skin crawl. Even if they may seem like the best person, be so fucking careful of who you entrust with your future. This situation seems beyond precarious. Moral of the story is businesses behave like businesses sometimes, and questionable practice is common. However, people expected better from Channel Awesome. People wanted better from Channel Awesome because of how it presented itself. If you want to set up a business or a site, don't just give it to the first person who asks, and certainly don't give anything away that could be held against you as ransom in the future. If you are a creator, be very careful of who you work with and what they can actually do for you. Do not commit yourself and don't let them off just because you like them. A wrongdoing is a wrongdoing, and do not let third parties exploit your respect for the figureheads of the company, and do not let them denigrate you. You're worth more than that. And if you do decide to work with your idols, you're often setting yourself up for disappointment. So try not to let excitement dictate your expectations. Regardless of what is said, I hope that we will move closer to discovering the truth, because if it is as it seems, although injustice will always exist in certain places, environments like Channel Awesome can do better, and they should do better. I hope that they will do better. The reason it has emotionally resonated a lot more, why there's passionate disagreement, is because it's a more intimate community. This feels more personal. It's only because people care. Channel Awesome has done things for people. People want it to be good, and that's a powerful sentiment. Doug, you've inspired many people. Don't let external factors be a foil to that perception. Only you know the truth of how you feel, and I hope you can convey that properly in the future. Your career is far from over, but I do hope you put out a response. I think it would be justified. More importantly, how do you, the viewer, feel? What are your instincts saying about these allegations? I'd love to hear your thoughts below. Also, I have a new Twitter, @TheRightOpinion, rather than @RightOpinionYT. I don't know if my outro will be sorted at this point about it yet, but hopefully it will be soon. Also, big shout out to the editors who've done a fantastic job. It's another beautiful edit, and I'm sure it's going to look great. And make sure you go and check out the editors if you do, because a lot of them make content themselves. But thank you for joining me with this truly fascinating discussion, one that provokes a number of interesting questions. However, until those questions are answered, I'm The Right Opinion, and I'll see you in the next one.